This is Letter from America, presented by Dr. Stanford Mukasa. Letter from America is a weekly in-depth analysis This is Letter from America, presented by Dr. Stanford Mukasa. Letter from America is a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. It is a broadcast on Change Radio, an internet-based radio station of the Zimbabwean diaspora and friends from around the world. Change Radio is aimed specifically at giving Zimbabweans and friends at home and abroad news, information, and a diversity of perspectives that are not available to them in the heavily government-controlled broadcast media in the country. The opinions and views expressed in Letter from America are solely those of the presenter and not necessarily of Change Radio.
In last week's Letter from America, we broadcast some of the survey results from Afrobarometer about what Zimbabweans think about the situation in Zimbabwe. One of the key findings was that nearly 70% of Zimbabweans in rural and urban communities believe the country is going in the wrong direction. Today, in part 2, we will review other findings about what Zimbabweans think about Mnangagwa's Zanu PF regime. The 2021 survey was conducted by Afrobarometer and compiled by the Mass Public Opinion Institute, or MPOI. The scientific accuracy of this survey was rural and urban populations were very well represented. Both rural and urban populations were in agreement that not only was the country headed in the wrong direction, but their socio-economic situation had gotten worse than the previous year. Rural Zimbabweans had always been seen as strong supporters of the ruling Zanu PF. The survey shows a declining support for the ruling party from their so-called rural strongholds. By an overwhelming majority of 78%, both rural and urban Zimbabweans rejected the idea that only one political party is allowed to stand for election and hold office indefinitely. More than 80% or 83.9% of both rural and urban Zimbabweans strongly disapproved that the army comes in to govern the country. Nearly 80%, urban 78.3%, rural 77.5%, agreed that democracy is preferable to any kind of government. More than 60%, urban 72.9%, and rural 54.9%, agreed very strongly or agreed that it is more important for citizens to hold the government accountable, even if that means it makes decisions more slowly. Given the endemic corruption, where more than $15 billion of taxpayers' money cannot be accounted for, 64% of rural and urban Zimbabweans agreed very strongly or agreed that Parliament should ensure that the President explains to it on a regular basis how his government spends taxpayers' money. 8% of rural and urban Zimbabweans strongly agreed or agreed that the Constitution should limit the president to serving a maximum of 2 terms in office. More than 2/3 or 71.5% of Zimbabweans agreed that there should be a minimum age for candidates for president. 1/3 or 30.7% agreed with 40 years of age as the minimum age for candidates for president. More than 40% or 43.8% agreed with 70 to 80 years of age as the maximum age for the president to hold office. MDC Alliance President Chamisa is 43 years old. President Mnangagwa is 70 years old. And this reflects the youthful nature of Zimbabweans and their support for a youthful leadership. More than half of the Zimbabweans, or 57.3%, agreed that Zimbabwe is not a democracy or a democracy with major problems. This included 51.2% in rural areas and 67.2% in urban areas. This is particularly important because the Zimbabweans themselves are saying there is no democracy in Zimbabwe. When asked how free you express yourself in Zimbabwe, 45.2% said not at all free or not very free to express yourself. This included 36.6% in rural areas and 59.4% in urban areas. Again, this highlights that more than half of the Zimbabwean population does not believe there is freedom of expression in Zimbabwe. When asked how free Zimbabweans were to join any political organization of their choice, 42.4% said they were not at all free or not very free. And this included 36.5% in rural areas and 52.3% in urban areas. However, 24.4% said somewhat free and 31% said completely free. This included 38.1% in rural areas and 20.1% in urban areas. Again, the fact that Zimbabweans do not believe there is democracy in the country is shown by the fact that they are not free. Almost half of them say they are not free to join any political organization of their choice. On the freedom to choose who to vote for, 50.6% said they were completely free, and this included 54.7% in rural areas and 44% in urban areas. However, 30% said not at all free or not very free. This included 24.9% in rural areas and 38.4% in rural areas. Even the idea of the freedom to choose who to vote for, which is supposed to be done by secret ballot, Zimbabweans still feel intimidated that they are not completely free. On political violence, 51.8% of Zimbabweans felt that competition between political parties often or always led to violent conflict. This included 55% in rural areas and 69.5% in urban areas. More than 70% of the Zimbabweans, or 73%, agreed very strongly that people should be able to join any organization whether government approves of it or not. An overwhelming 72.5% agreed or strongly agreed that people should have the right to communicate in private without a government agency reading or listening to what they are saying. This included 70.6% in rural areas and 75.7% in urban areas. This was the loudest rejection of the current government attempts to come up with laws to monitor citizens' electronic communication. A little over half, or 54.3%, said they feel close to a particular political party in Zimbabwe. This includes 59.4% in rural areas and 46% in urban areas. About 20%, or 19.5%, said they were aligned to the MDC Alliance party led by Nelson Chamisa. Almost 30%, or 27.3%, said they were aligned to Zanu PF led by President Mnangagwa. On the rule of law in Zimbabwe, 85.6% of Zimbabweans agreed or strongly agreed that the president must always obey the laws and the courts, even if he thinks they are wrong. And this includes 80.6% in rural areas and 93% in urban areas. Opinions were closely divided when asked how often the president had ignored the laws of this country. Almost 40%, or 39.5%, said never or rarely. This included 43.8% in rural areas and 32.5% in urban areas. However, 38.1% said the president often or always ignored the laws of this country. This included 28% in rural areas and 53.7% in urban areas. Asked how often people in Zimbabwe are treated unequally under the law, 56.9% said often or always. This includes 49.1% in rural areas and 69.7% in urban areas. And there have been protests that Mnangagwa's Zanu PF government are applying the country's laws inequitably, unequally. A member of the opposition is likely to be arrested on almost any charge, whereas a member of the ruling party will almost never be arrested. On how often officials who commit crimes go unpunished, 56% said very often or always, and this included 51.9% in rural areas and 64.4% in urban areas. In a remarkable contrast, 80% said ordinary people who break the law never or rarely go unpunished, and this included 82.4% in rural areas and 77% in urban areas. The protest, the criticism that the Zimbabwe government is not using the level playing field in application of the country's laws is being endorsed, is being underscored in these statistics. On the 2018 elections, 38.6% said the elections were not free and fair, or they were fair but with major problems. This included 21.1% in rural areas and 54% in urban areas. However, 28% said the elections were completely free and fair. On media coverage, 50.9% said the mass media never or sometimes provided fair coverage for all candidates. This included 43% in rural areas and 62.4% in urban areas. Another indication that almost half, or maybe more, of the population of Zimbabwe are dissatisfied with the state media because of their biases in favor of the ruling party. On political violence, 53.6% said they feared a lot, or somewhat, or a little bit, becoming victims of political intimidation or violence. And this included 47.1% in rural areas and 64.3% in urban areas. And again, the use of violence by Zanu PF is underscored here. More than half the population of Zimbabwe say they live in fear, especially of political violence that is perpetrated almost always by the ruling Zanu PF. Asked which party candidate they would vote for if presidential elections were held tomorrow, 25.7% said the MDC alliance led by Chamisa, including 19.1% in rural areas and 36.5% in urban areas. However, 33.1% said they would vote for Zanu PF, including 39.7% in rural areas and 22.4% in urban areas. However, 22.5% refused to answer, including 26.7% in rural areas and 15.8% in urban areas. These are the signs of intimidation. Sometimes people are reluctant to come out in the open and say which party, which candidate they are going to vote for fear of retaliatory violence. On the question of trust, 45.1% said they do not, or they have very little trust in the president, Mnangagwa. This included 44.9% in rural areas and 60.5% in urban areas. 57.6% said they do not have, or they have little trust in parliament, including 42.9% in rural areas and 57% in urban areas. More than half, or 52.1%, said they do not or have little trust in the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, or ZEC. This included 39.3% in rural areas and 73.1% in urban areas. These are the symptoms of captured state institution. When state institutions are captured, the president or the ruling party, they do whatever they want to do, including not following the laws of the country, including engaging in violence, including in engaging in elections that are not free or fair. And this is being indicated from these statistics from these survey results. Nearly one half of Zimbabweans, or 40%, said they do not trust or they have very little trust in Zanu PF as a ruling party. This included 51.2% in rural areas and 47.7% in urban areas. However, 46.1% said they trust Zanu PF somewhat or a lot. This included 36.9% in rural areas and 25.7% in urban areas. Equally, 49.9% of the Zimbabweans say they do not trust or have little trust in the opposition parties. This included 51.2% in rural areas and 47.7% in urban areas. But 41% said they trust the opposition parties somewhat or a lot, including 36.9% in rural areas and 47.8% in urban areas. Zimbabweans were asked to rate President Mnangagwa's job performance in the past 12 months. More than one half of the Zimbabwean population said they strongly disapprove President Mnangagwa's job performance in the past 12 months. This included 39.8% in rural areas and 71% in urban areas. However, 35.2% said they approved or strongly approved President Mnangagwa's job performance, and this included 43.8% in rural areas and 21% in urban areas. Again, the message here is simply the president and the ruling party. More than half the population of the country does not approve of their job performance. So what can we say in conclusion? The ruling party, Zanu PF, came in for a bruising in this public opinion survey. A major conclusion to be drawn from this survey was simply that Zimbabweans feel the country is headed in the wrong direction and that the conditions of Zimbabweans have worsened. What makes this disconcerting is Zanu PF has been ruling for 41 years. And this is the condition that Zimbabweans live in today. More than 50% of Zimbabweans now live below the poverty level. They are dirt poor. They have very little confidence in the ruling party and the president. The urban areas are a political graveyard for the ruling party. The level of discontent and dissatisfaction with the ruling party is simply jarring.
This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening.